Our last speaker, Bambi Ceuppens, has a PhD in social anthropology and has worked at the Royal Museum of Central Africa, Tervuren, in Belgium for several years now, and was responsible for an exhibition in 2010, I'm correct, Bambi, that to mark the 50th anniversary of the freedom of the independence of the Congo. Dr. Ceuppens' research interests include Western representation of Africa and African colonial histories, among other things, including as well as issues of multiculturalism and interculturalism. She has written several articles and has contributed to several edited volumes.
As Wayne said, I was the curator of an exhibition on Congolese independence that was organized last year in the Royal Museum for Central Africa, where I work, being that Congo is actually the raison d'etre of that museum. And right from the start, my idea was that we should tell Congolese history from a Congolese perspective with objects, interviews, and songs that either were made mainly by Congolese or otherwise created for a Congolese market, as is the case, for instance, with waxcloth, and that also have social and cultural meanings in Congolese society. And my original idea was that actually we would do that on the basis of so-called popular culture. But as the preparation progressed, I realized actually, or I started questioning or having questions about the concept of popular culture. And there is obviously the political interpretation that Johannes already alluded to. There is also the whole idea that popular culture is basically the culture of the people, which begs the question, how do you quantify or qualify the people, or how many individuals do you have to have in order to be able to talk about the people? Then there is also the element that Johannes talked about and that I will develop in the course of my presentation, that is that it is based on discourses. But what I found most problematic, the more that I progressed in the preparation of the exhibition and my reflections upon what I had actually done in it afterwards, was the idea that popular culture entails practices of resistance to power. Because I thought, and it's not something that I can develop here because of lack of time, that it is actually not so easy to make that distinction, say, between practices of resistance to power and actual power relationships. And in addition, I increasingly have the impression, and that is something that Birgit also alluded to, that popular culture is actually inherently an unstable category. So now I'm more inclined, but as I say, this is still very much a work in progress, to think that it might be more useful actually to talk about vernacular culture, which allows us to subsume the differences that Birgit already alluded to between traditional, popular, and academic culture, and which most importantly allows us to see aspects of these different, or what we have also always been taught are different kind of cultures as intellectual objects or conversation pieces, as Johannes has called them. And so the idea is basically that when I talk about vernacular culture, I talk about cultural elements that are first and foremost communicative, that is, that they are discursive and or performative. I will show you a few slides of some of the objects that we showed in the exhibition. Unfortunately, I'm not able to include oral testimonies or music, because that would become too complicated, which tells us something about the difference between this kind of occasion and the societies that we are actually talking about. obviously, every picture tells a story, so I don't have the time to elaborate, but I'll just give you a brief overview of the kind of objects that we showed in the exhibition, and then you can clearly see that it was a mixture, say, of so-called traditional objects, objects made by so-called popular paintings, objects made by so-called academically trained artists, publicity objects, but also industrial objects of foreign origin, like, for instance, the wax cloth. Since the 1970s, because I'm basically talking about Congolese popular culture, there has been an impoverishment that has touched all levels of society, including the middle classes. 80% of Congolese now have to survive upon less than $1 a day. So this is one of the factors, but it is only not the only one, which has led to an implosion of the market for consumer goods, including cartoons, popular music, and paintings. And we see now, if you visit a home now in Kinshasa or in Lubumbashi, by and large, popular paintings are largely absent. And actually screens have replaced them, and by screens I mean television screens, computer screens, but also the screens of mobile phones and digital cameras. We also see that industrially made plastic objects have replaced wood objects made by local craftsmen, and actually I think that in the context of cities like Kinshasa and Lubumbashi, there really is something to be said for the idea that plastic is actually fantastic. And walls are now mainly adorned with calendars, publicity, family snapshots, and religious objects. And this obviously bears the question how, if there still is a vernacular culture in Congolese society, how can we actually exhibit it in museums? And obviously, there has always been street culture in Congo, and that, in a sense, is not new, but it seems, nevertheless, that there is now much more a focus on public rather than private decoration. And above, for those of you who are familiar with the contemporary Congolese music, this is the album sleeve of the traditional modern group Konono No. 1, from Kinshasa, and what you see is a picture of the market, and these kind of artistic displays are actually quite common. So every day the vendors come to the market, spend hours actually setting up their wares in an artistically pleasing way, and then at the end of the day they have to dismantle it and start all over again the next day. Also, even if there are very few popular paintings to be found in domestic settings nowadays, this kind of painting is still very much present in the streets of Kinshasa and Lubumbashi. And this is quite a new phenomenon, which was investigated, first of all, by Lie Yoka, a Quinoa intellectual who takes a keen interest in the public culture of his city. And these are the kind of signals and phrases that can be read on public transport, in particular taxis. Mokonzi means God. And the David star suggests that this is actually a reference to God, and as you can see, a number of the phrases, which are very common, actually have a religious connotation. But Mokonzi is actually also one of the many names that are given to Koffi Olomide, who is one of the great stars of Congolese music. And then there are also the kind of wordplay that Quinoa like very much, like, for instance, Che Guevara, which becomes Che Vara, and Shege is the Lingala term for street kids. which some argue is derived from Schengen, so the European zone within the European Union, within which people or Europeans or citizens of the European Union can roam freely, and in much the same way then the Shege, the street kids in Kinshasa, know no boundaries, literal or metaphorically, but really claim the city as their own. Then there is, of course, the popular music, which is ubiquitous in Congolese society. And here it is also very important to realize that whereas most Westerners think first and foremost of Congolese popular music as being dance music, whereas it can't be denied that actually Congolese dance upon this music and actually love doing so, but if you ask them what the appeal of popular music is, 9 times out of 10 they will refer to the lyrics. Because the whole point is precisely, and apart from politics, I think you can safely say that the lyrics of popular music is the favorite conversation topic in Kinshasa, is precisely that, as Johannes said, the whole point precisely is that these songs, like the popular paintings, are intellectual objects that prompt conversations, that prompt reflections, and then obviously at the bottom, say, of what I call vernacular culture is obviously language. And then one of the prime examples of that is the also ubiquitous radio trottoir, that is the rumor mill, that is really at the basis of much of popular culture, specifically in Kinshasa. And in this particular case, Radio Trottoir was actually a song by Franco and Le Tout-Puissant Orchestre Jazz, one of the most famous orchestras in popular culture. And Franco himself was the object of a great many rumors. And being who he was, he always replied to his critics in his lyrics. And in this particular number, he actually denounces the rumor mill that is Radio Trottoir in Kinshasa. So faced with that, as I said, the question is how can we actually try to show these kind of elements of popular culture that seem to be on the run, for instance, in the streets of cities like Kinshasa or Lubumbashi, or that are not as, say, aesthetically pleasing as most of the objects that we tend to think of, or the kind of objects that are usually shown in Western museums, whether they are art museums or, as is the case with this particular museum and the museum where I work in, ethnographic museums. And then I think, and here I want to return to the whole idea of vernacular culture, it may be interesting or important to actually situate what we tend to think of as popular culture as forming part of a longer tradition or of histories and genealogies. And on the top, you can see a wax cloth which depicts Etienne Tshisekedi, who was the major opposition leader under Mobutu and who is also a candidate for the presidential elections next year. So this is obviously the kind of political wax cloth that was exhibited in the exhibition in the Tropenmuseum last year that Paul talked about. What may seem less obvious is that also the wax cloth underneath has actually a political message, although it was not intended by the creators of this wax cloth, because this is a very expensive Dutch super wax, which is made by Vlisco, but which Congolese, and only Congolese, call le cerveau de Tshisekedi, so Tshisekedi's brain. Now, this whole idea of saying, inferring meaning to industrial objects go back to practices of attributing meanings to objects which were made by craftsmen, like the famous potlids, but also these tissues which were made in Yombe. And as Birgit says, the point is not simply what the meanings is of or was of these objects, but precisely the kind of conversations that they prompted. So the idea is not simply that you try to tell something by a symbol or a metaphor instead of talking or using plain language, but that you actually use it as an occasion to have a discussion or a conversation about profound familiar or social issues. And as I said, this practice has now been displaced, as it were, on industrial wax cloth, which obviously have been created with different intentions. This is another interesting example to apparently completely different objects. Underneath, you can see a copy of one of the paintings of Chibumba, which is here in the Tropenmuseum, which remembers how during the Second World War and thereabouts, the Katangese were very afraid of the Simba Bulaya, that is European cannibals. And actually, even if the form is very different, the message contained in the so-called traditional mask above is very similar. This mask was created at the other end of the Congo by the Pandey, and it was created in the context of the compulsory cotton cultivation, and thus in a very similar fashion depicts Europeans as monsters, that is, individuals with two heads, and by the same token, two mouths, and that means a voracious appetite. I'll pass to my final examples. Should museums like the Museum in Tervuren or the Tropenmuseum exhibit the classical or the conventional European guitar? I would argue yes, on the one hand, because it is the major instrument in Congolese popular music, but on the other hand, it is also very important to note that the first Congolese guitarists, like Dr. Nico or Franco, actually used a so-called traditional method of fingertipping to actually play these guitars. Nico played the guitar rather as a likembe, whereas Franco played it rather in the way that one plays a so-called traditional harp. And then, of course, the so-called traditional likembe has been amplified. And underneath, we see the famous satonge, which was created by one of the musicians of Benda Bilili, whom you can see at the right, which is based upon the harp, although it's almost certain that the creator has never seen a so-called traditional harp, and it actually consists of a can of milk powder with a single cord. The final point that I want to make is that on the left-hand side, we see the so-called traditional drums, which are not widely used anymore, and the craftsmanship is mainly lost. But the most often used drum kit nowadays simply constitutes of a can of powdered milk, which for some reason or other is always Nestlé from Kinshasa to Lubumbashi, and which you simply play on with a couple of sticks. And it may seem very far removed from this so-called traditional likembe, which comes from the collections in Tervuren, but in the meantime, we have established that quite a number of musical instruments that we have, such as this one, while beautiful to look at, are actually not functional and were almost certainly created for the European art market. and were then put behind glass by curators who did not know how to play these particular instruments, and therefore did not know actually that you simply cannot make music with them. And that obviously is the whole point that I want to make, that if we talk about vernacular culture as I see it, we're not talking about objects like these which are silent, we are talking about objects that talk, that sing, that dance, that perform. And that is precisely what I mean when I talk about vernacular culture as being discursive or performative in nature. So my conclusion would be that one of the major challenges that museums face is not how to rip off people by making them pay money to come to your museum and look at cans of powdered milk behind glass, but actually show them what the whole discursive and performative context in which these cans and other everyday objects are used, and their discursive and performative power. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.